Hello, and welcome back to another Tracker video, where today I am going to try and find the lowest point on Eeloo. So here you can see I am launching a rocket, and this rocket has the winners of the yearly ZPA Kerbal event on, and they are going to explore Eeloo and try and find the lowest point. So you just saw booster separation there. And then I noticed that the staging was completely wrong. Got to remember to check your staging, as Scott Manley says, which I obviously didn't remember. Coming up on stage separation, which had a little explosion, but the explosion was not of anything important, so it didn't matter. Now I've cut out I've not recorded any of the making of maneuver nodes because this video would end up being quite long, so I've cut all of that out and I've just kept all the burns to get there. So there's the Kerbin escape burn, and this is a very long inclination change burn with the nuclear engines. As it's an inclination change at a relatively low altitude above the sun, it took a lot of delta V to do that burn. I'm beginning to think that I should have sped this specific burn up to 16 times, because this is a very long video. So yeah, this is the inclination change burn. And there I'm finishing off the burn, and I'm going into map view to make sure I get the orbit precise. Here's the Eeloo capture burn. This one I was actually sensible and I used physical time warp to speed through it. So this is now equivalent to 16 times because this video is sped up 4 times and the game is sped up 4 times. Now, as the burn took so long, I had to split the capture burn into 2 burns. The second burn, I did it with no maneuver node because the maneuver node bugged out. But then I realised that I put myself in too perfect of an orbit. I put myself in a equatorial circular orbit, but the lowest point on Eeloo is actually up north near the pole. So here I am burning out again to put myself on a very eccentric orbit so I can do this inclination change burn for less delta V. I wasted a lot of fuel doing that, but sometimes you make these mistakes, and I wasn't feeling like loading a quick save for that. And there we are in a circular polar orbit. and I somehow managed to get a perfect polar orbit with an inclination of 90 degrees. Anyway, here is the lander coming down to land. Now the lowest point is in this brown basin here, and the lowest point is actually below sea level on Eeloo, and you might notice a few bugs that pop up as a result of that. So the lander's coming down. And you may notice the terrain just went slightly transparent. And that's to do with the camera being below sea level. Now, I don't know if you watched my video before where I landed below sea level on the Mun, but when I did it on the Mun, the terrain did not go transparent. So it was a bit of a surprise when the terrain suddenly went transparent when I was landing. I even loaded a quick save on the surface to see if that would fix it, but it didn't. Anyway, here I am deploying the slider rover. It's kind of like a sled, really, like it just sort of slides. Gravity, it's basically got 4 wheels pointing outwards, and I set their friction to 0, which means it just slides with no friction, so gravity pulls it towards the lowest point. So I'm getting Jason Kerman, on the slider rover, and I'll deploy it. And I knew I landed quite far away from the lowest point, so I wasn't sure on how I would do this, but in the end I just reduced the friction control to 0 to set it off and just let it slide away. Now there is a epilepsy warning here, as there's a very fast time lapse which might result in fast changing images. So you can see I am using the thruster on the slider rover a bit. See, I wanted to make the slider rover completely powered by gravity, but I still wanted a way to control it, so I added a couple of small monopropellant tanks and a small monopropellant thruster underneath it, so I can move it around with the thruster. It works surprisingly well, though sometimes you can accidentally flip the rover doing it. So you can see I'm just sliding away towards the lowest point. You can see the altitude is negative and it's getting lower. You can see I placed a waypoint on the map where I thought the lowest point was, based on satellite scans I did with ScanSat. Now, sometimes the rover doesn't come to rest exactly on the lowest point, as there might be multiple valleys around the area, and that just so happened to be the case here. The rover settled in an area that wasn't actually the true lowest point. So what I did is I planted a flag there, and then I moved the rover with the monopropellant thruster to see if I could find a lower point. You can see I'm walking the Kerbal around to see if I can find a lower area. But in the end I move the rover around, and then I flip it by accident with the thruster. I get it back upright again, and I just use the thruster to try and slide it over to an area to to see if I can find a lower area. Anyway, here I am moving the lander over because I thought it would be easier to have the lander closer, because the rover had gone 10 kilometers away at that point. And as you can see, the rover ended up settling 1 meter lower than the area where I placed the flag. And there I am opening the cheat menu to show flight info so I can see the precise altitude to the centimetre. And then the Kraken attacked Kerbal Kerman, or Kerbin Kerman I mean, which was quite funny. Well, Kerbin Kerman was getting out some flags to plant, as I needed multiple flags to point out the various valleys to see which valley is the lowest. So I start thrusting the rover around with the monopropellant thruster to see if I can get it to settle in a lower area. And then it settled here, which was slightly lower, but not quite where I thought the lowest point was, because I was looking at the lowest point based on the temporary Kerbal maps, which says it's at like minus 386.89 meters. And then I ended up finding the lowest point at minus 386.99 meters. And there I am planting the flag there after taking it up and replanting it because it was facing the wrong way. So the lowest point is actually 10 centimeters lower than what it says on the temporary Kerbal maps. And then I go and take the rover so I can pick up the other flags I planted so that they're not misleading. You can see I completely overshot because using friction control as the brakes is not very effective, and if you brake too hard with it, it quite easily flips it. So there I am stopping the rover next to the flag, and as I don't have 2 seats on the rover, nor do I have 2 rovers, Jason Kerman has to walk there to take the picture with the flag and the rover at the lowest point. So there we are at Eeloo's lowest point, minus 386.99 meters. Part of me wishes it was that 1 centimeter lower so that it was minus 370, but yeah. Here is the lander taking off again. But yeah, that whole portion with the rover trying to find the lowest point, that took me like over an hour to do. It took a long time to find the lowest point. So here I am setting up a maneuver node to see if I can get into orbit with a rendezvous. Can't get too close because I had to align the planet first with the orbit. Had to align the lander with the orbit because of, if I didn't, I would have to do an expensive inclination change. Speaking of inclination changes, I did one just then. And now I just time warp around the planet to get the 2 spacecraft closer together. I do a small correction burn there to get the rendezvous closer. And you can see they are less than 300 meters, so I burn to slow down, burn directly towards it, and I actually crashed into it a bit, but That's a way of slowing down the spacecraft without using fuel. As long as you don't hit them too hard. And here I am doing the docking. I transfer the Kerbals and move all the fuel from the lander into the transfer spacecraft. Another fun thing is I forgot to give the Kerbals their jetpacks for this mission, so I had to transfer the Kerbals through the fuel tank, and I couldn't as easily right the rover when it flipped upside down. But anyway, here I am doing a rather unusual escape burn. You can see I'm sort of halfway between prograde and normal. Now, as if you watch a lot of my videos, you know I don't do much space flight on Kerbal. I used to do more space flight, but I sort of moved away from space flight and started doing other things like trains. So I don't know what the most efficient way of doing things is in space, but my intent with going halfway between prograde and normal was to try and get the ejection angle straight with the orbit. I'm not sure how much that helped or didn't help, because, as I said, I don't really do space flight that often in Kerbal anymore, so I don't really know what the most efficient way of doing things is. So here I am doing a correction burn to get on a course to curve in. And I couldn't get my orbit line closer than that, so I ended up doing a secret burn I forgot to start recording for to get the orbit within the atmosphere. So here I am time warping down. The orbit was flickering a lot, it was disappearing for some reason. Now, normally that happens if it's like more than one orbit ahead, but I think there was a jewel encounter in the orbit further down in the orbit which was making things flicker potentially. I don't know, because I have had encounters flicker like that, but not in this way before. Anyway, here I am coming down to curb in after doing that burn that I forgot to record, separating the return stage, and here is the capsule, and we are entering the atmosphere now. Lots of plasma, and as you can see, lots of G-force, but the Kerbals don't black out in the end. And the plasma is disappearing. The parachutes deploy, and I notice I'm landing next to the River Kyle, the longest river on Kerbin. Now, I have played this game a long time. I've played this game for like 15,000 hours, and I have never landed this close to the river during a space flight. But anyway, we are at the end of the video now. We are landing on Kerbin. So remember, if you didn't enjoy the video, to dislike and unsubscribe, and maybe you won't watch the next video. Also, a little bonus bit here, you can see me cheating the Kerbal over to this airfield because it was, for some reason, Uberdam airfield was floating like a kilometre in the sky. But anyway, this is the real end. Remember to dislike and unsubscribe if you didn't enjoy the video.